Hello, YouTubers. I'm bringing you the lesson for April 19th. It's called An Executed Scoundrel. And it's coming from the book of Esther, chapter 7, verse 1 through 10. But before I go to chapter 7, I'll give you an overview of chapter 1 through 6. King dethrones Queen Vashti. King Xerxes had a drinking feast for 180 days for his princes and nobles, whereby he was proud of the kingdom and the vast wealth, so he was indeed showing that off. Then he entertained a populace for 7 days, while Queen Vashti had a party for her maids. Xerxes, in his high spirits, commanded Vashti to appear before him to flaunt her beauty, in which she said no, she wasn't coming. Vashti is then banned from the presence of Xerxes because his advisor was telling him that if he allowed this to happen, when he had given a command that all the wives would do to the princes the same thing as Vashti did, disobey him, and that was not to happen. So that's why the king banished Vashti from his presence. So after a time went by, the king's anger with Vashti had subsided. So the servants suggested that he choose a queen from one of the virgins brought before him. So they went through the whole kingdom looking for nice-looking, beautiful virgins for him. During that time, Mordecai, a Benjamite, had taken up the upbringing of Hadassah, because she was an orphan. Both of her parents had since died, and he was her cousin. So during that time, the king made a decree and commanded that all the young ladies were to gather to the citadel of Susa. Subsequently, he chooses Esther, beauty in form and face. So what happens during that time, Mordecai saves the king. Two of the king's officials wanted to kill the king, but the plot was foiled due to Mordecai. Mordecai overheard them, told then Queen Esther. She relayed the information to the king, and he ended up having the two guards hanged. During that time, it doesn't say what time that passed. That he had Bigtha and Teresh hung, but the conspiracy against the Jews had already been started. Mordecai would not bow down to Haman. So after these events happened, with the Vashti being disposed and Esther becoming queen, what the king did was promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. All the king's servants were to bow down before Haman, but Mordecai didn't bow down, nor did he pay homage. The king's servants wanted to know, why did he transgress the king's command? And Mordecai told them he was a Jew. Haman didn't lay a hand on him, but sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom. So Haman told the king that there was people in the land, this is devising that plot, that did not observe the king's law. So Haman went on to pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of anyone that carried out the king's business. So the king made a decree that all the Jews would be killed, including women and children. And you might ask yourself, well, why was he so angry? Just bowing down, he's going to get rid of all the Jews in the kingdom? That doesn't really make sense. But you have to know how the story went in Samuel. When King Saul was supposed to kill the Agagite king and everything. He was supposed to kill the king and all the possessions. And what Saul did, he didn't kill the king. He let him live and the animals as well. So when Samuel came to him, Saul was saying, oh, I did just what I was supposed to do. He said, what do I hear? Bleeding. And the king came to, he was like, you didn't obey. And so Saul was so upset with what he realized that he didn't do. He reached over to tear Samuel's garment, and he said, "This day the kingdom will be torn from you." So Saul lost his kingdom and subsequently to David. But Samuel killed King Agag. Remember, Agag is an Amalekite, and so is Haman. He came from that descendant. So that's why he was so upset, and that's why he wanted to kill all the Jews. So when that decree went out, Mordecai rented his clothes and was in sackcloth and ashes, and he was, very upset with what was going to happen. So he went to Esther and stated that it was not a time what was happening during that decree and what that decree stated. And he stated to Esther that she need to go before the king. And she said, "Oh, no, I can't go before the king. It hasn't been 30 days. And what happens is if you go before the king before you were called, you could be killed." And so Mordecai insisted that she remain silent. If she remained silent at that time, relief and deliverance would arise from the Jews from another place, and her life and her father's house would not be spared. So he indicated who knew that she should attain royalty for such a time as this. So Esther stated that if all the Jews in Susa and her maids would fast for 3 days, not eating nor drinking, that's what they would have to do before she would go in before the king. And that's exactly what Mordecai went back out and did as Queen Esther suggested. During that time, after those 3 days transpired, Esther went before the king on the 3rd, and he accepts her and wanted her to know what was troubling her, what was her request, even to half of the kingdom, it shall be given to her. She told him she would prepare a banquet for him and Haman. The king related what he would do for her at her request. Queen Esther made another banquet for the king and Haman. Of course, it was much drinking because that's what the Persian did. But Haman, even though he had so much, he was still angry by Mordecai not bowing to him. So Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows 50 cubits high made in the morning and ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet." Of course, haughty Haman had the gallows made. In that particular time, while he was making the gallows, and then he was going to go in before the king to tell him what he was going to do with Mordecai, during the night, in which, of course, Haman didn't know, the king could not sleep. So he had read to him the Chronicles and wanted to know, was the man honored who saved his life? And he was told nothing had been done for him. So when Haman came in, who was in the court, he said, what should the king ask him, what should he do for a man that did this? Haman, thinking it was him, said, "Bring the royal crown, the royal robe," that's the king's royal crown and robe and horse, "and parade him in around the city square." The king said, "Do this for Mordecai." You probably could have bought him for a penny because, of course, his hatred was so deep. And he was like, "Nah, I got to do this for somebody I hate." So his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, said to him, after he came back for parading Mordecai, he said, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived, and they hurried up and took him into the banquet which Esther had prepared. So now this is the 3rd time. At the banquet, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition and what is your request, even to half of the kingdom?" And Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor in your sight, and if it please the king, let my life give to me as my petition and my people as my request. So the king wanted to know who was he and where was he who presumed to do this? Because Queen Esther had said somebody was trying to get rid of her family and her people. And Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman became terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose up. He was angry. He went into his garden. And I could imagine somebody second in command, how upset he would have been that he would do such a thing. So, but Haman, of course, he stayed behind and to beg for his life from Queen Esther. Now, when the king returned from the garden, he saw Haman that fell up on the bed that Queen Esther was on, and immediately, when he saw that, he said, "Will he assault the queen in my house?" As a word went out of his mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona of the eunuchs said, "The gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of you." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. The main point we want to see here is that God's favor changes everything. And you know, God is always God. I am working. He said, God also uses the most unlikely person for his glory. He uses Joseph to bring his people out of Canaan when there was a famine in the land. He uses Moses, who had killed a guard and left and went to Midian, and then he went back to Egypt to help bring them out of bondage. So God's people are always going to be a remnant. A remnant will always remain. So fasting and prayer are the best things to do when facing obstacles that seem insurmountable. But when you look at the entire picture, you see God's providence. You see where evil that was prompted by Satan, he wants to get rid of that lineage. That's the lineage, the Jews that Jesus was going to come through. If he got rid of the lineage, he would have gotten rid of Jesus. But God knows everything. He knew who his plot was, and he was going to use to see that plot go forth. But oftentimes when you dig a hole, especially for God's people, you end up falling in it, in this case, hanging in it yourself. And that's what Haman did. So it's very important to realize, even in the day that we are today, in the midst of COVID-19, that we have to look behind the scenes to see what God is doing. Remember how he brought his people out of Egypt? He brings his people out of different circumstances when they were fighting the different battles. God over and over again. And his people, his remnant, will remain because they already have a place. As Christians, we're already seated in Christ Jesus. So what's going on in the world, it is like birth pains. Before you see anything new, it has to go. A seed has to be planted, it has to be grow, and things have to change. Nothing stays the same. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. So with that, I want to thank all the first responders, the firemen, the policemen and women, the nurses and the doctors that are on the front line, those needed personnel that had to go to work in spite of what was happening, whether it be bus drivers, grocers. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for your service. We appreciate that. And we want to continue to pray for you that things will change dramatically in your life. But like he said, we are to look to the hills from whence cometh our help. Our help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. We can rest assured that he is for us. He is more than the world against us. So with that, I want to say, have a blessed time on today. And remember, this day that the Lord has made, he said, rejoice and be glad in it. Remember who gave the day to you, and also be encouraged. This too will pass. Thank you for listening. And those who want to join me on Sunday at 9, from between 9 and 10, because we're only going to do it for an hour. We're going to have adult Bible me on the Zoom app by putting in ID number 726-460-320 and password 634144. The first 100 people will be able to attend, so please be early. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a blessed day.